But it's hard. It's going to be hard to get there. I think that there's a lot of anger and there's a lot of despair. And that's a volatile mix. But we have to keep trying. And it is Bill asked earlier about American leadership. Part of the reason why America remains indispensable, part of the essential ingredient in American. Leadership is that we're willing to plunge in and try, where other countries don't bother trying. I mean, the fact of the matter is that in all these crises that have been mentioned, there may be some tangential risks to the United States. In some cases, as in Iraq and ISIS, those are dangers that have to be addressed right now. And we have to take them very seriously. But for the most part, these are not, the rockets aren't being fired into the United States. The reason we are concerned is because we recognize we've got some special responsibilities. We have to have some humility about what we can and can't accomplish. We have to recognize that our resources are finite, and we're coming out of a decade of war and our military has been stretched very hard. As has our budget. Nevertheless, we try. We go in there and we make an effort. And when I see John Kerry going out there and trying to broker a ceasefire, we should all be supporting him. There shouldn't be a bunch of complaints and second guessing about, well, it hasn't happened yet, or nitpicking before he's had a chance to complete his efforts. Because, I tell you what, there isn't any other country that's going in there and making those efforts. and more often than not, as a consequence of our involvement. We get better outcomes, not perfect outcomes, not immediate outcomes, but we get better outcomes. And that's going to be true with respect to the Middle East. That's going to be true with respect to Ukraine. That's going to be certainly true with respect to Iraq. And I think it's useful for me to end by just reminding folks that, in my first term, if I had a press conference like this, typically, everybody would want to ask about the economy and how come jobs weren't being created. And how come the housing market is still bad, and why isn't it working? Well, you know what we did worked. And the economy is better. And when I say that we've just had 6 months of more than 200 000 jobs, that hasn't happened in 17 years. That shows you the power of persistence. It shows you that if you stay at it, eventually we make some progress. All right? Question: what about John Brennan? Question: the Africa Summit, Ebola? President Obama, I thought that you guys were going to ask me how I was going to spend my birthday. What happened to the happy birthday thing? Statement: happy birthday. Question: what about John Brennan? Question: Africa Summit. President Obama, I will address 2 points. I'll address. Question: and Flight 17? President Obama, hold on, guys. Come on. There's just. Question, and Africa. President Obama, you're not that pent up. I've been giving you questions lately. On Brennan and the CIA, the RDI report has been transmitted. The declassified version that will be released at the pleasure of the Senate committee. I have full confidence in John Brennan. I think he has acknowledged and directly apologized to Senator Feinstein that CIA personnel did not properly handle an investigation as to how certain documents that were not authorized to be released to the Senate staff got somehow into the hands of the Senate staff. And it's clear from the IG report that some very poor judgment was shown in terms of how that was handled. Keep in mind, though, that John Brennan was the person who called for the IG report. And he's already stood up a task force to make sure that lessons are learned and mistakes are resolved. With respect to the larger point of the RDI report itself, even before I came into office, I was very clear that in the immediate aftermath of 9/11 we did some things that were wrong. We did a whole lot of things that were right, but we tortured some folks. We did some things that were contrary to our values. I understand why it happened. I think it's important when we look back to recall how afraid people were after the Twin Towers fell and the Pentagon had been hit and the plane in Pennsylvania had fallen, and people did not know whether more attacks were imminent. And there was enormous pressure on our law enforcement and our national security teams to try To deal with this, and it's important for us not to feel too sanctimonious in retrospect about the tough job that those folks had. And a lot of those folks were working hard under enormous pressure and are real patriots. But having said all that, we did some things that were wrong. And that's what that report reflects. And that's the reason why, after I took office, one of the first things I did was to ban. Some of the extraordinary interrogation techniques that are the subject of that report. And my hope is that this report reminds us once again that the character of our country, has to be measured in part not by what we do when things are easy, but what we do when things are hard, and when we engaged in some of these enhanced interrogation techniques. Techniques that I believe and I think any fair-minded person would believe were torture. We crossed a line. And that needs to be understood and accepted. And we have to, as a country, take responsibility for that so that hopefully, we don't do it again in the future. Question, Mr. President. President Obama, now, I gave you a question. Statement, all right. Question, the summit the U.S. Africa. President Obama, we've got a U.S. Africa summit coming up next week. It is going to be an unprecedented gathering of African leaders. The importance of this for America needs to be understood. Africa is one of the fastest growing continents in the world. You've got 6 of the 10 fastest growing economies in Africa. You have all sorts of other countries like China and Brazil and India deeply interested in working. With Africa not to extract natural resources alone. Which traditionally has been the relationship between Africa and the rest of the world, but now because Africa is growing and you've got thriving markets and you've got entrepreneurs and extraordinary talent among the people there. And Africa also happens to be one of the continents where America is most popular and people feel a real affinity for our way of life. And we've made enormous progress over the last several years in not just providing traditional aid to Africa, helping countries that are suffering from malnutrition or helping countries that are suffering from AIDS. But rather partnering and thinking about how can we trade more and how can we do business together. And that's the kind of relationship that Africa is looking for. And I've had conversations over the last several months with you. As businesses, some of the biggest US businesses in the world, and they say, Africa, that's one of our top priorities. We want to do business with those folks, and we think that we can create US jobs and send you as exports to Africa. But we've got to be engaged, and so this gives us a chance to do that. It also gives us a chance to talk to Africa about security issues because, as we've seen, Terrorist networks try to find places where governance is weak and security structures are weak. And if we want to keep ourselves safe over the long term, then one of the things that we can do is make sure that we are partnering with some countries that really have pretty effective security. Forces and have been deploying themselves in peacekeeping and conflict resolution efforts in Africa. And that, ultimately, can save us and our troops and our military a lot of money. If we've got strong partners who are able to deal with conflicts in these regions. So it's going to be a terrific conference. I won't lie to you, traffic will be bad here in Washington. I know that everybody has been warned about that. But we are really looking forward to this, and I think it's going to be a great success. Now, the last thing I'm going to say about this. Because I know that it's been on people's minds, is the issue of Ebola. This is something that we take very seriously. As soon as there's an outbreak anywhere in the world of any disease that could have significant effects, the CDC is in communication with the World Health Organization and other multilateral agencies to try to make sure that we've got an appropriate response. This has been a more aggressive Ebola outbreak than we've seen in the past. But keep in mind that it is. Still affecting parts of 3 countries, and we've got some 50 countries represented at this summit. We are doing 2 things with respect to the summit itself. We're taking the appropriate precautions. Folks who are coming from these countries that have even a marginal risk or an infinitesimal risk of having been exposed in some fashion. We're making sure we're doing screening on that end as they leave the country. We'll do additional screening when they're here. We feel confident that the procedures that we put in place are appropriate.